Welcome back, William Mayville and Theodore Ouyang. I know it's been a little bit since we last spoke. I know we had a previous podcast episode, but today we are excited to be updated about a future satellite that is about to be launched soon through some of these funding mechanisms and the actual design of this CubeSat from these two gentlemen here. So let's reintroduce ourselves, or rather yourselves, to the audience. Let's start with you, William.
Hello, my name is William Mayville. I am a senior at American Heritage School. Well, I've been involved with Mr. Simmons' program since I was in the 5th grade, and I'm looking forward to continuing to play a role in this.
Hi, I'm Theo. I'm an MSEIB senior at St. Louis High School, and like William, have been part of the program for a long time, same amount of time, and I'm the principal investigator of the FlipSat-1.
So remind us about what the FlipSat is and what its mission is, like the whole CubeSat part, and then we'll talk about how it's taken you quite some time to get it off the ground.
The FlipSat-1 is a half-year hosted payload that will launch, I believe, Q1 of 2024, and it studies the effects of radiation from computer chips by analyzing different protection methods in space. Basically, the essence is that when radiation and high ionized particles that make up radiation strike the transistors of a computer chip, it can change the stored binary code from a 1 to a 0 or a 0 to a 1, and this in turn can cause a cascading effect of the overall code. And we tested various methods of protection, both digitally and physically, and that's the essence of the FlipSat-1. And this idea was originally conceptualized in, I believe, 7th grade, and then after several rounds of not getting funding and then sort of putting the project on the back burner, we were eventually able to get funding through the WolfC or the Global Youth Satellite Initiative.
Right, and if I recall correctly, Theo, the paper that you wrote about FlipSat was the very first paper primarily authored by a student that was selected for the International Astronautical Congress. And if I'm correct, you and Bo and Paul presented that in Washington, D.C. in 2018. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I believe it was also like eventually I found out like 4 years later, like 6 months ago, but it was like peer reviewed it was put into like a peer reviewed journal index with Scopus on the internet.
It was a good paper. Yes.
Well, William, he mentioned that it took a while to get funded. Like normally the CubeSats that we've started with were funded through the NASA's CubeSat Launch Initiative, and it just wasn't happening here because it wasn't being selected. So tell us, remind us a little bit about what WolfC was and how it's morphed now into become something even larger than that mechanism that's going to send FlipSat.
Sure. So WolfC was originally created to help fill some of the gaps with existing programs like the CSL, or pre-existing programs like the CubeSat Launch Initiative, especially with respect to secondary education, so opportunities for middle and high schoolers. WolfC was originally focused on the FlipSat-1 as sort of a proof of concept program for schools without, massive partnership funds, schools without federal assistance, being in student teams without those resources, being able to design, build, test, and fly a satellite entirely through the private sector. WolfC originally stood for Wolfpack Orbital Launch Funding Competition, and we've since changed that name to the Global Youth Satellite Initiative as our mission and scope has broadened. Over the past year or so, we've expanded with a pilot program for international expansion, working with roughly 15 teams to get emulators in Peru. Moreover, given that we're now extending beyond, like I say, Wolfpack associated students, and on a global scale, we, as such, modified the name to indicate an increasing desire to provide students, not just in South Florida, but throughout the country and now throughout the world, with these wonderful opportunities to develop soft and hard skills through CubeSats and affiliated technologies.
It's outstanding. I know recently you'd gotten some feedback from one of your Peruvian teams. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had, as is normal with any international project with technology like this, some initial difficulties with customs, distribution, etc. However, recently the students have begun to, receive and then build the emulators. And recently, the first high altitude balloon from one of the Peruvian teams was launched. So that was, really exciting moment for us, or for me, I should say. And that, I guess like a green light to further expand with the Peru program, and hopefully in the future, whether it's at the helm of the program or successor. Further, more countries in Latin America through our partner organizations have been incredibly helpful to us thus far. So that's really wonderful news coming out of Peru right now. All great news, and wish them the best.
Yeah, and I just want to remind our audience, which they may or may not know, the A3SAT emulator that you've sent 15 of them to Peru was actually designed initially by students, much like yourselves, in New Jersey. So it's a student-built hardware developed by high school students primarily that are now being distributed by basically high school students to other international kids.
So before I ask my question of Theo, let me make sure I understand something. So it sounds like, William, the mechanism that now has kind of morphed into this started with a way to provide students like Theo a ride to space, but has now gone on into a teaching mechanism as well, so that someone who might not already have the means of understanding how to build a satellite are able to learn on these emulators. Would I be correct in that before I move to Theo?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, my program has always had two components. One is, material resources, mostly financial, and the second component has, always been education, that sort of, mentorship that is so important when working with students in, these formative years.
Great, got it. So my question to Theo now is this: so that funding mechanism was like after you had already put in some work to come up with the proposal, refine the proposal, and then the last time we met, we were kind of just like you were ready to actually now it was ready to be funded. But since we spoke, I think you had to go to integration. So let's pick up where we left off from that last interview and talk a little bit about what's happened since. So tell us a little bit about integration and any challenges that you've met along the way to getting this to fruition, and kind of remind us of the process now of the actual building to get ready for launch.
Integration was an interesting experience. We had a bit of a amateur move, I guess, where we used the wrong type of filament with our chassis, and that filament would have been, it would have been not technically feasible to use in space, and I think also illegal. It just wouldn't reach the outgassing or temperature parameters that NASA expected in both and also our integrator. So we had a long process with redoing the chassis and then redoing the way that everything's wired up in order to be basically in line with the standards for launch into space. A member of the Wolfpack development team, Daniel Portaslevi, was integral and instrumental in leading that effort, and I'm very grateful to him for that. But since then, we've had some correspondence with our integrator, making some last final changes in both the code and the actual wiring of the system, and it should be good for launch now.
So what I find most satisfying about this is would you describe this as a very intense and real world learning experience, as far as taking an idea you had, which was a great just idea on paper, and then sort of bringing it into the real world? I think I'd like you to elaborate just a little bit on your thoughts on, I had this idea when I was in the 7th grade, and in order to make it fly here a few years later, some real work went into it. I'd like you to give us an idea about the kind of work that you did to take your idea to the real world.
Well, there are a lot of steps in the entire process. There's getting the funding, going through the different CSLI programs, then going to William eventually. And then there was also the actual construction of it, where to go through different chassis integrations and a lot of different program integrations. For example, at one point we thought we had a working prototype. We thought it all worked. And then right before we were ready to sort of, show the final working version, we did one final test, and then boom, we somehow shorted the entire system. So that just showed us some of the technical issues with going through the actual process, and we learned a lot about sort of the planning out the project experience. There are a lot of learning opportunities with both printed circuit boards and CNC materials, and just it's a very, very cohesive learning experience, not just funding wise, but also technically, and then also collaboration wise. We had a lot of students. We had students from the Y School, we had students from Suncoast, and we had Williams from American Heritage, and then we also had input and advice from all those other organizations like Near Space Launch, and the advice from Dr. Platt from FIT, I believe.
Yeah, he's a
Um,
professor at Florida Tech, and he owns his own company called Micro Aerospace Solutions. Theo, I also noticed as watching, sort of on the side, I saw you learn a lot about leadership and managing people. And I think that we don't have enough time for you to talk about the challenges of getting people from different organizations and different ages and different interest level or maturity level to get them to all come together to accomplish this. Is there anything you might like to share about the human factors part of building your satellite?
yeah, I sort of underestimated it. Previously, just with the team, everyone was very like satellite finish to satellite focused. There was a lot of like, oh, I'll drag my feet on this, or like, oh, it's done, but it wasn't really done. But then, when we had to like collaborate with different people, a lot of virtual work, lots of sort of you have to trust someone to sort of get their work done. And there was a mix of both, like sort of letting the people do their own work and also micromanaging, and just sort of the flip flop between both wasn't good. So eventually, to find a sweet spot where we were making sure people were doing their work, we weren't interfering as much, so as to slow down the process.
So that I think these skills are going to translate really nicely to you as when you're an adult or an engineer and a project manager. I don't think you could have gotten much more real world experience than this.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking when I hear this. And of course, I watched you both through this process. I can't think of anyone. We've interviewed a lot of people, and I don't know, Kevin, if maybe there is somebody, but I've never met anybody who, what he's done through the help of William here is he's launching a satellite that, we know happens at the university level, but he's graduating high school. Do we know anyone who's kind of, I know that there have been high schools, but what I mean is he's entering like the workforce already having done in high school what he would have to have waited for as a university student.
That's correct. And in fact, Theo, you don't know this, but I was in Glasgow at the Pocket Cube conference. We were talking about you and your project. I mentioned the fact that you were too young to be eligible for the Naval Academy, and the folks at the conference were like, yeah, he pretty much is employable right now. You have the skill set that you could work as an entry level
would somebody
aerospace.
Consider that without a degree?
No, they want you to show that you've sucked it up for 4 years and got your your sheepskin. But the fact that the level of work that you and your team did says a whole lot about your the interest that companies are going to have to hire a person like you with your skill set.
Well, I think whatever university you end up choosing to go to, provided you stay in this arena, you'll probably be leading the efforts instead of just kind of joining on and learning as you go. So it's pretty.
Yeah, you'll be able to contribute at a much higher level at a faster pace, more likely than a lot of your contemporaries.
Are you doing engineering as your career path? Because I'm going to transfer this to William in a second here with a question, but are you planning to go engineering?
Basically, a lot of universities don't have an aerospace engineering program, especially a lot of the top universities. So what I'm doing is I'm applying for aerospace engineering, for mechanical engineering with a focus in aerospace. But I'm also interested in majoring in business. So I'm considering that route. Not solely majoring in business, but doing a dual major. But also, I'm really grateful for the entire FlipSat-1 opportunity, because William and I are both young, and a lot of the opportunities here in South Florida are very age restricted. For example, at Suncoast, the thing to do is go off and do a research internship at either Scripps or Max Planck. And it's pretty much a given if you're in a certain program and have certain grades, so you can get those opportunities, and it's highly prestigious. But then when you go to the application, these very harsh age cutoffs just make it impossible, including NASA too. All the NASA virtual, hybrid, in-person internships are you can't even start an application if you're under a certain age. So FlipSat-1's this unique cross barrier experience.
Yeah, I spoke specifically to the STEM outreach people at the Naval Academy about how inflexible the rule was that it's ageism, right? It's not about the ability of the applicant, it's about just a hard physical age. I had one quick question for William. When we go back, William, now we know all the work that went into FlipSat. I want to pivot real quickly back to your A3 emulators, because one of the points that we did not cover already was the quality of the teaching, all the tools that come with that hardware. Now, you sent these small kits, correct, to the Peruvians, but you mentioned your emphasis on education. And it's my understanding, having looked over those kits, that Max and the guys in New Jersey have an enormous amount of content for the educators and for the students as far as helps. Have you spent much time with any of the resources that came along with your A3SAT kits?
Have I actually I personally have read the guides and such, or?
Well, I just wanted to know if you could speak to the quality of the content that you sent to Peru, in addition to the hardware.
Sure. So, so based on the discussions and communications I've had, as well as some of the material that I have actually been able to look over, we see that there's been that folks in Peru have a series of wonderful opportunities ahead of them in regards to understanding the educational opportunities with understanding how to construct the emulators and how each component physically interface with each other, but also how the various circuits work, breadboards work, and so forth. In software, which is just as important as I'm sure to any mission, as I'm sure Theo can attest to. And then we also have the actual implementation of that hardware and software with missions such as high altitude balloons as the most prominent example, as we've seen recently. And so while the A3SAT, it will never get into space. It's not designed for space flight. It is an incredibly valuable educational tool that gets the ball rolling, much like those first tethered balloons and high altitude balloons did for the Wolfpack all those years ago. And so, in a number of years, I hope to see those schools in Peru eventually launching actual satellites of their own. And I think that would be a truly wonderful next chapter in this epic.
Agreed.
So I know that you're both VIP members or Vanguard innovation program members of the Wolfpack, and we have the 3 lanes. William, are you looking to go into entrepreneurship or business as well for your major as you're heading off to college soon?
I'd like to probably major in economics, and this is because my ultimate career is finance, the reason why I think is that the Global Youth Satellite Initiative is a great example of this. While I could have just focused on one team and focused heavily on one team, through this initiative, I've been able to thus far provide a great deal of benefits to 16 teams and I'd say hundreds of students. So I think that the scale of impact and helping people such as Theo to have the resources needed to take their programs and take their teams to the next level is something that I find truly rewarding, both in a professional sense as well as personally rewarding. And so I look forward to enter the private sector and continue to do that, being able to help people both across in Florida and hopefully across the world be able to realize their dreams, much the way the Global Youth Satellite Initiative has helped teams like Theo's.
So when I remember you both, when I first met you, you were friends, you were pals, and I actually remember, William, a little stuffed penguin. I remember you both had, I remember you that little with little stuffed animals, both of you. You were the penguin guy, am I right?
Yes.
All right. And Theo, I remember you in some SpongeBob pajamas at one point. That's how long we've known each other, right? So you guys were really good friends. You would go on play dates. Now that you're older, your colleagues, are you still friends? Is that something that you guys still get? I mean, would you still get together and have, a cup of coffee if you did that, or whatever it is, a Coke, and discuss business at this point? Is that something that you see yourselves doing now and in the future?
Certainly, yeah. Theo and I, we've been friends since, I want to say first or second grade, very, very close friends. And so, of course, and I think that this has been a really, I'd say as a result, FlipSat was really a wonderful pilot program because sort of the human connection that's necessary for, something like this to work was already there. It wasn't something that we had to spend time sort of figuring out. So I think that, the relationship, the friendship between Theo and I has, been an incredible advantage to both of our programs.
Yeah, I actually saw William in person this spring at the FBLA state conference in Orlando, and we were able to actually sit down and have some food and talk about FlipSat. And then it was so fixed that we hop on the game.
Theo, tell us what the abbreviation is with our
Future Business Leaders, is it? FBLA?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember
it's a
in school, that's a big deal. So you both kind of ran into each other and you reconnected. I think it's a great story, right? Like it's one of those things that you watch Wozniak and who was he with, Jobs, right? So you watch them kind of growing up together, and then they have their issues or whatever, they come to. I just think it's kind of cool that you guys were friends as early as first grade. So if someone were to do your biopic at some point in the future, or like you guys are, working together in these major industries where Theo is either creating and, satellites and companies of satellites, and William's financing, providing opportunities. I think we're gonna, it's worth a movie script. I think I like it.
Right. And so as we think about why we're talking today, it's because the launch date has been announced, right, for the FlipSat, the mission that will include FlipSat. And so it's the Transporter 10 mission that has a launch date of 1 March, March the 1st, 2024. It will launch out of Vandenberg Space Force Base, and I believe it's going into a somewhat of a polar or sun synchronous orbit. This is going to be a huge mission. So FlipSat is actually part of something really large. Momentous Space is also a part. This company is a part of this mission, and of course, our dear friends at Near Space Launch, in which our Theo, your FlipSat is inside the troop hardware. There's actually going to be some formation flying. So this is a very exciting mission that you're part of. It took years of work by you and William and lots of people to get here. The integration was actually in May, and then there was a partial rebuild. Then all of the work you've been doing with debugging the code and making sure that your hardware, which was fine by itself, now is a part of this larger vehicle that is talking well, when they're running the ground test. It's just a very exciting time. I guess that brings me to this point. Do you think either of you might be flying out to Vandenberg for the launch?
It's past January 2nd. All college apps are already finished by then. So honestly,
so you're
anything's
free
up in
to
the
fly. Free to fly.
So I would encourage you, if your school schedule allows it, and that's another thing. Right in the middle of all this activity you guys are grinding, trying to get into these, great schools. And I know your workload, from having talked with you and with your parents, you've been really grinding, right? And it's nice. I know you guys got to be relieved a little bit to know that at least there's a little bit of a break once you get all of those college apps in. So I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity, you guys should go to Vandenberg and be there in the grandstands, like I was with our very first satellite in 2018.
We should do a watch party regardless.
Yeah.
Like, even though for those of us who can't go, but if you guys are there, like, that would be a big deal. We can do, back when we launched WISAT, right? It was like, 3, 2, we did that big countdown. We got to do that online.
That was, there's something to be said for being there when your mission takes off. So it's got to be exciting, and frankly, you've got to have a sense of relief, right? Once it's in the rocket, you can't screw up, and once the rocket takes off, it's all out of your hands. Then, are you guys what do you imagine you'll experience once that rocket engine fires and that Falcon 9 sends up FlipSat? What do you think you'll experience, or what are your thoughts on that?
A mix of fear and excitement, probably. Once it's safely in orbit, I'll be happy. But once it launches, once those like rocket engines come out, I'll be a bit scared, a tiny bit.
If it blows up on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's the rocket blowing up. I think what you're worried about is, will it talk to the, will you get telemetry, right? Which means it's working.
That's been my number one concerns with this entire project, connecting between the payload interface board, which is how we connect with Troop, and our project. Because the project itself, you could run that project on Earth. It wouldn't be that crazy. It would be a pretty crazy experiment, but it wouldn't be it's out of this world, incredibly technical experiment. But when we have to connect it using serial input with the Troop payload, the complexity tripled or quadrupled. It's just so much harder, and that's probably been most of our efforts in the past 4 months. And that's what I really want to see succeed once we launch into space.
Didn't WISAT-1 not send telemetry at first? Something happened with it, right?
No, we started out in low power mode. We had to sit on the shelf so long that our batteries ran down.
That's right, the battery ran
down. And we could not go into operational mode right away until the batteries got to a certain level. Luckily for you, Troop is going to send you a dedicated voltage line, right? So your power is set, right? There's some nice things about your project, Theo. you don't have to worry about your radio turning on, and you don't have to worry about your batteries working. But like you said, I think I was unaware of, until your project, of the complexities of a payload talking to the bus radio. I mean, this has been very enlightening. So,
And
we live and learn.
And William, you must be feeling like a proud parent by when it launches, right? Like when it launches. So Theo's just gonna be like nervous because that's like his project there, but you're like the parent of this whole thing who allowed it and willed it to happen. So Saint, what are your thoughts going to be when it finally up there?
Certainly, yeah. So, when that when it successfully launches, when it gets to, not if, when it gets to orbit safely, begins operations, everything goes according to plan. I think this will be a wonderful moment and sort of a vindication of everything that we've been saying thus far about, on the podcast, especially you two who have done a wonderful job thus far. And frankly, as I alluded to before, to my knowledge, this is the first time there's been a student-built satellite without, a school trust fund backing it, without federal funding backing it, entirely through, the private sector, of course, philanthropy. And so its success, I believe, will be a major step forward for the democratization of space access and for the advancement of aerospace education, especially with CubeSats at the middle and high school level of education. So
Right.
I think it'll truly be a wonderful moment.
I agree. I just want to make sure you guys leave 2021 October. Next fall, when we have small sat at KSC, I don't care where you guys are at university, you need to come. So we need to celebrate, right? And I want you guys on the podium together to share, what has happened now that FlipSat, and obviously, William, with all that's going on in Peru and South America with your global youth satellite initiative, I really want you guys to be there to share your successes.
Well, as we wrap up, I have to ask, because I know some of, I've known both the schools you're at, and I know some of the teachers at the school. Do any of your teachers even know this is going on? Like, are you just a regular student to them, or do they go, oh, this guy, he's launching satellites or he's providing opportunities?
That's some of my teachers, I've spoken to about, especially my physics teacher. He worked at CERN, NASA. He's very into aerospace. He's a wonderful man. Shout out to you, Mr. Cribbs. But that's mostly it. This isn't really something I discuss that much at school.
No, I know, because like I was talking to one of the debate coaches, right? They're like, hey, is William still involved? I'm like, yeah, he's still involved. And when I was like, so I could imagine you guys going through like just a regular student, just one of the many, right, of the numbers of faces there. But in reality, you're like doing ridiculous things. Theo, what about you? Do your teachers have any idea?
Well, we had we had a club on campus to sort of like facilitate the membership. So, there was some knowledge of it, especially from the club sponsor, that Miss Pearson. And then also, we recently had, well, my counselor knows about it because my counselor had to write my rec letter for colleges. And then we recently had the Pathfinder Awards nominations process. And as a result of trying to get the science nomination, I had to share that with a lot of people, but I got it. So hopefully in January I'll get it.
Oh my gosh, Theo,
award.
you gotta remind me of this. I want to make an announcement on our website. That's a big deal to get the Pathfinder nomination.
So
that's
Thank
fantastic.
Yeah, that's great, Theo.
I mean, that's huge.
I can literally think of 2 kids in the Wolfpack right now that are directly trying to emulate you guys. I have a new guy by the name of Winston Neville, and William, he is trying to come up with, basically a philanthropy model, and he wants to help raise money for satellites. And Theo, you got Colin Quinn right there at school with you, who is eat up with, being the PI on his first satellite as well. So you guys know that we at the Wolfpack, we place a lot of emphasis on mentoring and modeling. So you guys, I know you have been a part. Gosh, you were there at the very beginning as 5th graders, and now you're 12th graders, 7 years later. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of kids that I believe you've had a positive impact.
Are they going to be able to maybe mentor now that, well, I mean, we haven't done an official announcement, but I think you did to Wolfpack about.
So yeah, we should find out this week if we're selected by Firefly. I don't want to sound presumptuous, but we got some good internal communications that we believe Wolfsat-1 will be selected. So And if we don't get it, I'll cut this part of our interview out. But we do feel like we're going to get that. And so that will require a rapid offloading of institutional knowledge that you guys have with the younger kids before you go off to college, if we could.
I mean, that's exciting. So
Yeah, of course. And then also wherever we end up, hopefully we can get people there involved too.
Exactly.
sounds good. We have to bring more university help back to the Wolfpack. Well, guys, thank you for spending some time with us on your busy weekends. I know, especially during the holiday season, at the time we're recording this, it's really good seeing you. And you know, stay tuned here after we disconnect, because I just want to ask a couple questions of you outside. So it's so good to see you again.
Thank you, guys.
Wonderful speaking with you as well.
Thank you for this opportunity.